Hey, what's up everyone? Today we're going to talk about something that people don't normally talk about. It's sometimes seen as, not pleasant, but I think it's necessary. We need to talk about it because without defining it, without overcoming it, we won't be able to get to success. The thing that we're going to talk about today is overcoming failures. And I think I've gone through a lot of failures. I ran my business, Vodian, for 17 years, and I've always been an entrepreneur, and I failed multiple times before. It's really not about failing though. That's almost like a guarantee that will happen in your journey as well, but rather how we deal with it. So stay tuned. So first of all, we need to define what is failure. I think failure is something that has a bad connotation to it, especially when I was growing up. When I was growing up, there were two main things that happened in my life, two main areas of influence. One is like in school, especially in the school system that I grew up in, failure is seen to be a bad thing. It's pretty much natural because if you look at the school system, it's a very structured syllabus. Everybody goes through, studies, and after that there's an exam. And at the end of it, if you fail your exam, that's a very clear case of failure. So we might grow up to have a little bit of fear of failure because of that, but we shouldn't see failure as a black and white thing, especially in life or in business. Thankfully in my life though, I had another influence that really shaped the way I looked at failure. It was my father. I remember as a kid when I was growing up, my father used to help me a lot with a lot of things, like whether it's building furniture at home or building computers at home. So my dad's not very well educated. He had a primary school education, and the thing is he was great with computers. He didn't really understand computers completely, but he understood how things work. He was very handy with, and like he understood like the physics and mechanics of everything. And I remember one of the things that he always said was that there's always a way to solve something. Anything from like a small little problem or furniture that wouldn't fit, or like, a part of the computer that didn't work, or maybe the computer couldn't boot. Anything could be fixable. And I think with these two influences in my life, I saw like how failure could be viewed from different lenses and how we could actually overcome failure. So we're gonna talk about how in this video. And there are three main things. First of all, we need to define what failure is. Second of all, we need to know where we are going, and more importantly, why. And lastly, we need to know how to take action when we fail. So these are the three things that we're gonna cover. Let's dive into it. Defining failure. What exactly is failure then? I've mentioned these two areas in my life when I was growing up. Both areas talk about failure, but in both cases, failure is very, very different. We've got to be clear that we're not talking about maybe a structured environment such as a test, where failure is pretty straightforward. It's black and white, right? Either you make the grade or you don't. And that's dependent on the knowledge that you have, how well you are prepared, and all of that. Even in the businesses that we run, we have quizzes and assessments and tests, especially for product knowledge or operational knowledge or whatever knowledge that we need to test for, right? That's pretty straightforward. However, there's the other aspect of failure as well, and that comes in a sense of actually trying to get to a particular result. And I think the quote by Thomas Edison says it the best. So Thomas Edison says, "I have not failed, I have just found 10,000 ways how not to do it." And he was doing basically his experiments and building a light bulb. And so Thomas Edison didn't discover how to build a light bulb on the very first try. He actually tried for 10,000 times before he actually created a light bulb that worked. And for those 10,000 times, he saw it as ways not to build a light bulb. And I think that was a great frame, because every time he found something that didn't work, instead of being defeated, it kept him going, because now he knew something that didn't work and he could try a different angle. And I think that's a great way of approaching any problems that we have, especially in terms of business. So that's defining failure, right? So if we see failure as just one step of the way to getting to success, that's great. The second thing that we need to be very aware of is that we need to know where we are going and why. I talked about this in my other videos where I talk about the bridge framework. This is something that's in my book. It's part of the 5E scale engine, and this is the first principle, the principle of evolve, because it has got to do with the mindset that we have as entrepreneurs, and the thought processes that we need in order to scale up our businesses. So part of that is coming from a place of intent, knowing where we are going, and more importantly, why. The framework that I use for this is called the waterfall of intent, which actually brings forward the result. We need to know where we are going first. That's the end result. Then we can figure out what we are doing now and whether or not that will bring us to the end result. So if you haven't checked out my book, if you haven't, go check out my book. It's available at superscaling.com/book. So end result first. This allows us to be very clear about where we are going. And so you'll notice that this applies to almost anything in life, not just business. What is the end result? If we want to have a successful career, what does a successful career look like for us? Is that in terms of money? Is that in terms of impact on other people? Is that in terms of absolute amount of growth or personal growth? Or is that, in terms of mastery of a certain skill? It all depends on what your end result is and what you define as a successful career. So knowing that allows us to work backwards and understand what we need to do today in order to get there. I've had a lot of people ask me about their career choices, and I think it's a very personal decision that you need to make. First of all, knowing where you're going, because if you don't know where you're going, then any road will lead you there. So this waterfall of intent helps you frame where you're going, and then after that define how to start your journey and what you're doing today so that you can get there. More importantly, also you need to know why you're doing that. I think a lot of times we see the end result and we think we want it, but we don't really understand the sacrifices that are necessary to get there. Talk about entrepreneurship, for example. People like looking at the famous entrepreneurs in the papers or in the news, people who have raised hundreds of millions of dollars, the billionaires, the Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk's, Bill Gates of the world, and they see that and they want to be like that, but they don't see the sacrifice that it takes to get there. They don't see what it needs to commit to in order to get there. They don't see the personal development and the growth journey it takes in order to get there. And that can only come with a very strong why. All these people that I just mentioned, they didn't become the millionaires, the billionaires that they were or they are today because they wanted to be billionaires. They had a bigger reason behind it. Jeff Bezos wanted to create an everything store. Elon Musk wanted to go to space. He wanted to make space travel possible. He saw a better way of driving, a better car. These are things that really drive them and keep them awake at night, over the weekends, thinking about work, being in work all the time. And not just something that you work on like between 9 to 6 and then you go off to do something else. I think that commitment is something that comes when you know where you're going and why you're doing so. And then lastly, the third point is actually taking action on failure. So failure will happen. What's more important is what we're going to do when failure comes. I like to see failure as almost like as though you're shooting an arrow, like using a bow and arrow and shooting at a target. When we first shoot an arrow, more likely than not, the arrow is not going to hit the bullseye. When that happens, we shift our aim. If the arrow falls to the left of the bullseye, what's going to happen is we're going to shift our aim to the right, and hopefully it gets closer to the bullseye, right? And it's not going to be something that we'll probably do on the first try, on the second try. It might take many tries. But as long as there's some improvement, as long as every single arrow that we let loose, something improves. It could be the position of our body, it could be how we hold a bow, it could be where we are actually aiming at. All these things, if it's continually improving, we'll eventually get there. And I think that's the same thing for overcoming any failures in business. Once we know where we're going, once we know why we're doing that, and if we face failures, we know that each failure is actually just one thing that we shouldn't do anymore, and then we just repeat the process with another way of doing things, with another method. Eventually we're just going to be able to get there. And that's the way I treat failures. Hopefully this helps. Hopefully this gives you a better idea of how failures can be used or reframed so that you can overcome failures and you understand the journey that you're on and like where you're headed towards. Because once you do that, you realize that failure is just part of the journey, and hopefully you get success. You get to success that way. So these are the 3 things that we need to know in order to overcome failure. Number 1 is to define, first of all, what failure actually means to us. Number 2 is to know where we are going, and more importantly, why we are doing so. Number 3 is to understand how to take action on failure itself. So hopefully this video helps you understand how to overcome failure. Please like, share this with someone who might benefit, as well as subscribe to the channel so that you'll be notified whenever I put out a new video. Drop me a comment as well, let me know what you think, if there are any topics or questions that I can answer, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.